A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
You know, Herman, I was looking at some old scripts the other day, and it struck me how many writers think that writing for children is just adult writing with the big words taken out. It is that classic trap where people assume simplicity is the same thing as ease, when in reality, stripping a narrative down to its most foundational elements is probably the hardest technical challenge a writer can face. It is like the difference between building a complex skyscraper for adults and building a set of wooden blocks for a toddler. If the skyscraper has a minor architectural flaw, an adult might notice a drafty window. If the wooden blocks are weighted incorrectly or have sharp edges, the entire foundational experience of play is ruined.
Herman Poppleberry here, and you are hitting on something that developmental psychologists have been shouting from the rooftops for decades. Today's prompt from Daniel is about building a roadmap for professional creators moving into the children's media space, and it is a timely ask. We are seeing a massive influx of talent from traditional film and television trying to pivot into streaming for kids, and many of them are hitting a brick wall because they do not realize they are moving from a creative field into a highly regulated, scientifically backed ecosystem of developmental stewardship. It is not just about telling a story anymore, it is about understanding the cognitive architecture of the person receiving that story.
Stewardship is a heavy word, but it fits. When you write for adults, you are entertaining peers. You are operating on a level playing field of shared experiences and fully formed brains. But when you write for a 5-year-old, you are literally providing the building blocks for how they perceive reality, language, and social interaction. It is a massive responsibility that goes way beyond just making sure the characters are cute or the colors are bright. We often talk about the responsibility gap in this industry. A generalist writer might think they can just pivot to a preschool show because they have a kid at home, but that is like thinking you can perform heart surgery because you have a heart.
The barrier to entry is deceptively high because the stakes are not just commercial. If you write a bad legal thriller for adults, the audience is bored and they change the channel. If you write a developmentally inappropriate show for toddlers, you are potentially interfering with cognitive milestones, or, at the very least, creating a high-stimulus environment that can lead to behavioral issues down the line. We touched on this back in episode 1166 when we talked about the Morbegs. That show worked because it understood the slow, deliberate pace required for a child's brain to process information. It respected the silence. Modern writers often try to apply adult pacing, the rapid-fire dialogue and quick cuts to children's content, and the result is what I call the sensory firehose. It is overwhelming, not engaging.
That sensory firehose is exactly what a lot of the algorithmic content on YouTube looks like today in March of 2026. It is all bright colors, constant high-pitched noises, and cuts every 2 seconds to keep the engagement metrics up. But if a professional writer wants to do this right, they have to start with the psychology. You mentioned developmental stages. How does a writer actually map a narrative to someone like Piaget's stages of development without having a doctorate in psychology?
You do not need the doctorate, but you do need the rubric. For instance, if you are writing for the pre-operational stage, which is roughly ages 2 to 7, you have to understand that children are still struggling with egocentrism. This is not a character flaw, it is a biological stage. They find it difficult to see a situation from another person's point of view. So, if your script relies on a complex misunderstanding between two characters where the humor comes from, the audience knowing something one character does not, what we call dramatic irony, a 4-year-old might just get frustrated or confused. They are not being thick. Their brains literally haven't finished framing the concept of theory of mind yet. They cannot hold two conflicting perspectives in their head at the same time.
So, the irony that drives most adult comedy is basically a non-starter for the younger brackets. That is a huge adjustment for a writer who spent 10 years writing snarky dialogue for sitcoms. You have to find the humor in the physical or the literal, which sounds easy, but making literalism funny without being condescending is an art form. It requires a level of precision that most writers never have to develop.
Being condescending is the quickest way to lose a child audience. They can smell it a mile away. A common mistake is using baby talk or oversimplifying the vocabulary to the point where it becomes patronizing. Research actually shows that children benefit from hearing what we call stretch words. These are words that are just slightly above their current level, but are used in a context that makes the meaning clear. If you are writing a show about a squirrel, do not just say he is fast, say he is nimble. Show him being nimble. Use the word in the sentence, demonstrate it through the animation, and suddenly the child adds a new tool to their kit. The writing feels elevated and the child feels respected.
I like that. It is about respect. You are respecting the audience's capacity to learn. But let's talk about the technical side of the script itself. When a professional writer is handing in a draft for a children's show, there is usually a vetting process that is way more intense than anything in the adult world. It is not just the showrunner looking at it. Sometimes there are educational consultants or even psychologists involved. Can you walk us through what that multi-pass review system actually looks like?
The script vetting protocol is intense for a reason. In a professional studio, a script will go through at least 3 specific passes after the initial creative edit. First is the linguistic path. This ensures the vocabulary and literacy level matches the target demographic's reading or listening level. You are looking for sentence length and complexity. Second is the social-emotional pass. This is where you look at the messaging. If a character gets angry, how is that resolved? In an adult show, the character might punch a wall or go on a bender. In a children's script, you have to model a healthy resolution, like taking a deep breath or talking about the feeling, because that kid is going to mimic what they see. We call this pro-social modeling.
That brings up the point about messaging versus preaching. We've all seen those shows that feel like a 30-minute lecture on sharing. They are exhausting for parents and boring for kids. How does a writer bake in a pro-social message without making it feel like a Sunday school lesson?
It comes down to narrative structure. You have to let the character fail and experience the natural consequences of that failure. If the theme is honesty, the character shouldn't just be told not to lie by a wise owl at the end of the episode. They should tell a lie and then see how it complicates their life in a way that is tangible to a child, like losing a toy or missing out on a game because they weren't where they said they would be. The lesson should be the resolution of the plot, not a monologue. This is where the technical skill of a seasoned writer really shines. You have to weave the educational goal into the character's internal motivation.
Moving from the creative side to the practical, let's talk about the legal and regulatory guardrails. This is where a lot of independent creators or writers moving from film to digital get burned. Specifically, things like COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. If you're writing for a platform like YouTube Kids, your script and the resulting video are under a microscope.
COPPA is the big one, and it is something every creator needs to have a working knowledge of. Originally passed in 1998 and updated several times, it is designed to protect the privacy of children under 13. In the context of content creation, especially on platforms like YouTube, it changed everything around 2019 after a massive FTC settlement. If your content is designated as made for kids, the platform cannot collect personal data for personalized ads. For a writer or producer, this means your monetization model changes overnight. You cannot rely on the same ad revenue structures that a general audience channel uses. As of early 2026, the regulations have only tightened.
And it is not just the money, it is the features. On YouTube Kids, comments are disabled. In-screens are different. You cannot have the same kind of community engagement that you might have with an adult audience. This affects how you write your calls to action. You cannot say, "Tell me in the comments what you think," because there are no comments. You have to think about the safety-first production pipeline from day one.
You have to design the content with these restrictions in mind. For example, if you are creating interactive content, you have to be extremely careful about how you ask for any kind of input. You cannot ask a child to enter their name, their age, or their location. Even something as simple as a contest has to be handled with extreme legal caution. From a conservative perspective, this is one of those areas where the regulation actually serves a vital purpose in protecting the family unit from predatory data harvesting. We want our kids to be able to enjoy stories without being treated as a data point by a tech giant. It is about creating a walled garden where the only thing growing is the child's imagination.
I think most parents, regardless of their politics, can get behind that. But it does make the job of the creator harder. You have to be more creative with your engagement. Instead of asking for a comment, maybe you ask the child to draw a picture and show it to their parent, or you give them a physical task to do in the real world. You are trying to bridge the gap between the screen and the living room.
That is the goal. We talked about this in episode 515 regarding screen time. The best children's media is not a babysitter, it is a springboard. It should encourage the child to turn off the screen and go play. If your script ends with a prompt that gets a kid to go look at a bug in the backyard or build a fort out of pillows, you have won. You have used technology to facilitate real-world development. This is the opposite of the attention economy model, which wants to keep the child's eyes glued to the screen for as long as possible using dark patterns.
Let's define those dark patterns for a second. For a writer, what does that look like in a script?
In a script, a dark pattern might look like artificial cliffhangers every 30 seconds that trigger a stress response, or using repetitive, high-frequency sounds that command attention through biological reflex rather than interest. It is also seen in scripts that encourage addictive loops. Think of those unboxing videos where the narrative is just a constant stream of new surprises with no emotional resolution. A professional writer should aim for deep engagement. This is where the child is focused, because they care about the character and the story, not because they are being overstimulated by the edit.
It is the difference between eating a healthy meal and just eating pure sugar. The sugar gives you the immediate spike, but the crash is coming. For a kid, that crash is a meltdown in the grocery store because their brain has been running at 100 miles an hour for the last 20 minutes, and they don't know how to downshift. As writers, we have to be responsible for the metabolic cost of our stories.
That is why I always point people back to legacy media like Mr. Rogers or even the Morbegs. Those shows were not afraid of silence. They were not afraid of a character just sitting and thinking for 10 seconds. In a modern script, 10 seconds of silence feels like an eternity to a producer, but for a child, that is the space where they actually internalize what they just saw. If you are writing a script, do not be afraid to write in pauses. Do not be afraid to let the visuals tell the story without a constant, frantic narration.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty of getting started. If I am a writer with a great idea for a cartoon or a series of educational videos, where do I actually go to learn the foundational skills? It is not like there is a writing for 4-year-olds class in most film schools.
There are a few key places to start. First, the Children's Media Association, or CMA, is a fantastic resource. They have chapters in major cities and offer a lot of workshops on the intersection of media and education. Another great tool is the Common Sense Media Rubric. Even if you are just starting out, look at how they rate shows. They break it down by positive messages, positive role models, violence, and language. If you can audit your own script against their criteria, you are already ahead of 80% of the people uploading to the internet. You should also look into the Joan Gans Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop. They do incredible research on how digital media affects childhood literacy.
What about the literacy aspect specifically? If I am writing for a specific age, say 6 to 8, how do I know if my sentence structure is too complex?
There are actually technical tools for this. You can use something like the Lexile framework or even a simple Flesch-Kincaid readability test on your script, but more practically, read it out loud. If you find yourself tripping over a sentence or using a lot of dependent clauses, it is probably too complex. Children process language linearly. They don't do well with sentences that circle back on themselves or have 3 different ideas packed into one. One thought, one sentence. That is the gold standard for early childhood writing.
One thought, one sentence. That sounds like a nightmare for my usual rambling style. But I see why it is necessary. You are managing the child's cognitive load. If they are spending all their brainpower trying to pass your grammar, they aren't following the story or the lesson. You are essentially competing with their own brain's processing speed.
And that brings us back to the practical takeaways for our listeners who might be looking to break into this. If you are transitioning from adult media, the first thing you need to do is build what I'd call a developmental Bible for your project. This is a document that lives alongside your series Bible.
I love that term. What exactly goes into a developmental Bible?
A developmental Bible should be the first document you create, even before the pilot script. It defines the specific age bracket you are targeting, say 4 to 6, and then lists the specific cognitive and social emotional goals for that age based on current research. If you are writing for 4-year-olds, your Bible might say, target audience is still developing fine motor skills and learning to identify basic emotions like frustrated versus sad. Then, every script you write has to be measured against that Bible. If your script requires a character to do something that requires complex manual dexterity, you have to realize the audience might not relate to that struggle yet. It keeps the writing grounded in the reality of the child's life.
Another takeaway is the script vetting process we mentioned. Do not just rely on your own gut. If you can, find a teacher or a child development specialist and pay them for an hour of their time to read your script. They will catch things you would never think of. They might tell you that a certain word is a common trigger for anxiety in that age group, or that a specific social interaction you have written is actually teaching a negative behavior that is hard to unlearn. It is the best investment you can make in the quality of your show.
And finally, stay on top of the platform policies. COPPA, and the YouTube Kids Guidelines are not static. They change as technology evolves. If you are serious about this, you need to be reading the policy updates from the Federal Trade Commission and the major platforms. It is the boring part of the job, but it is what keeps your production from being shut down or demonetized. In 2026, compliance is just as important as creativity.
It is about being a professional. If you are a professional writer, you know the rules of your industry. In children's media, those rules just happen to involve a lot of developmental psychology and federal law. It is a specialized field, and it should be treated with that level of respect.
What I find really exciting about the future of this space is how AI might help with some of the more tedious parts of this. We are starting to see models that can analyze a script for reading level or flag potentially inappropriate content, like imitative behaviors that might be dangerous, before it ever gets to a human reviewer. It can check if your script has too many high-stimulus triggers. It is not going to replace the heart of the story, but it can act as a safety net for creators.
As long as there is a human in the loop, I am for it. Because at the end of the day, you aren't just writing a script, you are building a child's worldview. An AI can check your grammar or your compliance with COPPA, but it cannot understand the emotional weight of a character learning to say goodbye or making a new friend. It cannot understand the magic of a story that makes a child feel seen and understood for the first time.
That is the human element that makes children's media so enduring. We still remember the shows we watched when we were 5 because they were our first windows into the world. They taught us how to be people. If you can create something that serves that role with integrity and skill, you have done something far more impressive than winning an Oscar for a gritty drama. You have shaped a generation's foundational memories.
That is a big thought to end on, but it is the truth of the matter. If you are making the jump into kids' content, do it with your eyes open and your heart in the right place. It is a tough gig. The technical requirements are grueling, and the regulations are a minefield, but the rewards are literally foundational to society.
We should probably wrap it up there before I start getting too misty-eyed about the power of storytelling.
Good call. Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flemingtop for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the technical side of this show.
This has been my Weird Prompts. If you are finding these deep dives helpful as you navigate your creative career, we would love it if you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you are listening. It really helps the show find its way to new ears.
We will be back next time with another prompt to explore. Until then, keep creating with purpose.
See you then.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to